Still a few things to sort out politically before the end of the year, maybe going over into next year. The opposition threatening to block the reforms to the Petroleum Rent Resources Tax, the PRRT as it's known. The government tabled draft legislation on Thursday. The coalition says it wasn't consulted and is demanding 4 new measures to make it easier for coal and gas projects to proceed. Joining me live is Nationals MP and former Resources Minister Keith Pitt. Thanks for your time. So where are you actually at on this? Are you weighing up as an opposition whether to just vote against it if you don't get changes?
Well, Tom, I think where it's at is the shadow cabinet's considering it. Nothing's been brought to the party room that I can recall. I've got a pretty fundamental view here. We stand for lower taxes. And I think the resources sector as a whole is currently under attack by the Labor government. You've got to look at what they've actually done. So the safeguard mechanism will increase costs. In fact, it will increase the cost for steel, for aluminium, for cement, for the fundamentals for building. You've got the Environmental Defenders Office, who are now funded by the taxpayer under the federal Labor government, and they go out and try and stop these projects, as you've seen with Santos and Woodside for the 2 big offshore projects. So for projects which have taken FID, that final investment decision, I think a lot of them are at risk, and any more changes will put them more at risk.
Not what the industry is saying, though.
Well, the industry is between a rock and a hard place. As I've said, they're getting attacked from all corners. They want to survive. They want to keep employing people.
This is an industry that ran an entire campaign to bring down a government on the mining tax. It's not a shrinking violet. It's got a lot of resources. It hasn't been afraid to speak out before. And on this, it's saying, look, there's small enough changes and we can handle it, the money.
Well, as I've said, look at all the other things that are going on.
But it knows all the things that are going on.
But that includes Labor's alleged closing loopholes bills. You've got in tax and industrial relations. They're in the courts constantly, as I said, funded by the taxpayer. Barossa was a $5 or $6 billion project, currently parked up. You've got Scarborough and Woodside, which I think from memory is about $15 billion, are currently challenged and having significant difficulties. And these are big projects that take years to develop. They're in the national interest. We actually need the gas. And yet we have a federal Labor government that seems to want to put them out of business.
The industry knows all these issues. It has an issue with the loopholes legislation, for example. It's campaigning against that, but not this tax. It says, look, relatively modest change, not that much money, makes a lot of money, this industry, and not as much for Australian taxpayers as it does other places where it's exported. So why are you ignoring what the industry's saying?
Well, I think they're weighing up their options and what's the lowest risk for them. But as a legislator, our job is to act in the national interest. And we stand on platforms of lowering taxes.
But you have to concede, they've said, we've got issues with some of the things that are happening, not this.
But look at what's happening in Queensland, Tom. So they've increased royalties up there to the highest level in the world. You've even
state issue, which they've opposed.
But you've had BHP out today saying that this is a real challenge for investment confidence. And these are the other pieces that fit together. I mean, our job as a political party is to make the right decisions in the national interest. And I think
national interest could also mean raising some more money, paying down debt.
Well, it could also mean
in a sector that says we can afford it.
It could also mean not blowing $180 billion in the last budget extra. I mean, this caper where they're saying, we've got to cut infrastructure projects for inflation control, but they spend $180 billion in the last budget. That
they didn't
gel.
Spend it in the last budget.
Well, they've committed it.
It's been outlined over a decade. I mean, saying they put it in the last budget's...
Well, actually true. They did put it in the last budget.
Well, they didn't put it in a budget. Part of that is indexation, which just happened. So this isn't extra spending. These aren't extra programs that
there was an additional $180 billion expenditure.
Well, a big chunk was indexation, though, which just happens, right? That's not a government decision.
Well, they're also claiming the future fund off the bottom line, which is that's fairly unusual. So I think there's a long way to go on this discussion around PRRT. There's a long way to go on infrastructure. There's some challenges there.
The real politic of this is if you say no, then they go to the Greens. That could be the effect. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, it'll be a matter of whether the federal Labor government is comfortable in doing another deal with the Greens.
Well, they have to keep dealing with them because you don't.
Well, the challenge for them is around what's the right decision. Now, clearly the coalition will take a position. That's yet to be determined and finalised. But if you have a federal Labor government whose only deal is with the Greens, well, they're the outcomes that they choose. It's not a decision.
Well, they can choose to do a deal or not, but they have to do it because that's the reality of the Senate. If you say no, they have to go with the Greens. Well, the only way they can get legislation passed. They're numbers we can agree on.
They can put the independents together.
That doesn't add up. They can't get there without the Greens.
I think they get pretty cloose.
Close isn't.
Well, you can get a draw from memory, Tom.
The
Senate's black magic, mate. Let's on the other side.
The draw doesn't help last time I checked.
Well, depends whether you want change or not.
And, well, we know the reality with One Nation. So yeah, they won't get there without you or the Greens. That's the reality. Just finally and briefly, what do you make of the Prime Minister and whether or not this was raised? This is the issue to do with the Chinese naval vessel approaching an Australian one, told we've got divers in there still enacting these sonar pulses. Thankfully, minor injuries, but a pretty egregious act. Do you trust the PM to balance up whether he has to, raise this and have sort of megaphone diplomacy or do it quietly? Because the China issue seems to have been pretty well managed by the government.
Tom, the alleged actions of the People Liberation's Army and Navy, well, they should be condemned.
They have been.
But it's as simple as that. They should be condemned. I condemn them. And the Prime Minister, why wasn't this up front and centre in those discussions? Why haven't we heard more? Is it just they're playing footsies with China on these issues for other matters? I don't know. But what I do know is that we all need to act in our national interest. This is a challenging period of time around the world. And I think that the Prime Minister needs to be more transparent when it comes to these dealings.
Keith Pitt, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Great to be with you.